The crack of splitting wood echoed across the frozen prairie like a gunshot, and Katherine Sullivan knew she was in serious trouble as her wagon lurched violently to one side, throwing her against the rough wooden seat hard enough to steal her breath. Ice stretched endlessly in every direction across the Arkansas Plateau, the November wind of 1878 cutting through her wool coat like it was nothing more than paper, and the nearest town, Eureka Springs, was still 15 miles away through terrain that had become treacherous overnight when the unseasonable storm rolled in from the north. She climbed down carefully, her boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground, and felt her heart sink when she saw the damage. The rear axle had snapped clean through, and one wheel sat at an angle that made her stomach twist with despair. Her mare, Buttons, stamped nervously in the traces, breath steaming in the frigid air. Katherine ran her gloved hand along the horse's neck, murmuring soft reassurances while her mind raced through increasingly bleak options. She had left Fort Smith 3 days ago with supplies for her father's mercantile in Eureka Springs, taking the overland route because the roads had seemed passable then, before winter decided to arrive a month early and with a vengeance that caught everyone off guard. Now she was stranded on empty prairie with temperatures dropping fast, the sun already beginning its descent toward the western horizon, and she knew with cold certainty that she would not survive a night out here in the open. Katherine was 22 years old enough to know real fear when it stared her in the face. She had made this journey a dozen times before, always careful, always prepared, but nature did not care about human caution. She pulled her coat tighter and scanned the landscape, seeing nothing but endless white and gray, the skeletal remains of prairie grass poking through the ice like accusing fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the emptiness, and she wondered if this was how her story would end, frozen solid on a broken wagon 15 miles from home. Then she saw him. At first, he was just a dark shape on the horizon, moving steadily through the bitter cold. Katherine's hand instinctively went to the rifle tucked behind the wagon seat, her father's warnings about traveling alone echoing in her mind. But as the figure drew closer, she could make out a man on horseback, riding a sturdy bay gelding, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and leather chaps, and there was something about the way he sat his horse, easy and confident, that made her relax slightly even as she kept the rifle close. The cowboy pulled up about 20 feet away, giving her space, showing respect. That alone told Katherine more about his character than words could. "Madam," he called out, his voice deep and steady, carrying easily over the wind. "Looks like you have got some trouble there." "The axle broke," Katherine replied, raising her voice to be heard. "I was heading to Eureka Springs." He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening, and walked his horse closer. Now Katherine could see his face properly, and she found herself looking at a man perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, and eyes the color of worn saddle leather that seemed to take in everything at once. There was a capable air about him, the kind of quiet competence that came from years of hard living and honest work. "Name is Dalton Xavier," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I have been working a cattle drive up north, heading home to my ranch outside Eureka Springs. Mind if I take a look?" Katherine nodded, relief flooding through her so powerfully that her knees felt weak. "Katherine Sullivan. My father runs the mercantile in town." Recognition flickered across Dalton's face. "Tom Sullivan. Good man. I buy supplies from him regular." He moved to the broken axle, crouching down to examine it closely, his gloved hands running along the splintered wood. Katherine watched him work, noting the careful way he assessed the damage, the thoughtful expression on his weathered face. After a long moment, he stood and met her eyes. "It is broken clean through. I cannot fix it proper out here, not with the tools I have got. But I can jury-rig something that will hold long enough to get you to town, if you do not mind a slow trip." "Anything is better than freezing to death," Katherine said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the tremor of fear that still ran through her. Dalton's mouth curved in a small smile that transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Well, I aim to make sure that does not happen. Let me get my tools." He worked quickly but methodically, retrieving rope and a small hatchet from his saddlebags. Katherine watched as he cut sturdy branches from a stand of oak trees that grew in a small depression about 100 yards away, where they had some protection from the worst of the wind. He was strong, she noticed, the kind of strength that came from years of physical labor, but he moved with surprising grace. When he returned with the branches, he explained what he was doing as he worked, his voice calm and reassuring. "I am going to splint the axle with these branches, bind them tight with rope. It will not be pretty, but it should hold your weight if we take it real slow. The trick is distributing the pressure even so nothing shifts wrong." Katherine found herself fascinated by the competence of his hands, the way he tied complex knots without looking, his fingers sure despite the cold. "How did you learn to do this?" she asked. "Ranch life teaches you to fix just about anything with whatever you have got on hand," Dalton replied, not looking up from his work. "My father always said a man who cannot improvise is a man who will not survive long out here. Lost him 5 years back to pneumonia, but his lesson stuck with me." There was a weight to those words, a grief that had settled into something bearable but never forgotten. Katherine understood that kind of loss. She had lost her mother to fever when she was 16, and the hole it left never quite filled in, just became part of the landscape of her heart. "I am sorry," she said softly. Dalton glanced up at her, and something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of shared pain and survival. "Thank you. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching and living right. I try to honor that every day." The wind gusted hard enough to make Katherine stagger, and Dalton immediately steadied her with one hand on her elbow, his grip firm but gentle. "You should wait in the wagon, get what shelter you can from the wind. I will have this done soon." "I would rather help," Katherine insisted. "Tell me what to do." He looked at her for a long moment, seeming to assess something in her face, then nodded. "All right. Hold this branch steady while I tie it off." They worked together as the temperature continued to drop, the sky turning from gray to a deeper, more ominous charcoal. Katherine's fingers ached with cold even through her gloves, and she could not feel her toes anymore, but she held steady when Dalton needed her to, passed him tools when he asked, and gradually the makeshift repair took shape. He reinforced the broken axle with the branches, creating a splint that was bound so tightly with rope that it seemed almost as solid as the original wood. Finally, Dalton tested the wheel, putting his weight against it carefully. It held. He nodded with satisfaction and looked at Katherine. "That should do it. But we need to go slow, and I mean real slow. Any sudden jolts could break it again, and next time we might not be able to fix it." "Slow sounds perfect," Katherine said, and meant it. Fast would get them nowhere if the wagon broke down completely. Dalton helped her climb back onto the wagon seat, his hand steadying her, and she noticed the calluses on his palms, the roughness that spoke of honest work. He mounted his bay gelding and positioned himself beside the wagon. "I will ride alongside, keep an eye on the repair. If something starts to give, I will let you know right away." They started moving, the wagon creaking ominously but holding together. Katherine kept Buttons to a careful walk, feeling every bump and rut through the seat, her entire body tense with the fear that the axle would snap again. Beside her, Dalton rode easy and alert, his eyes constantly moving between the makeshift repair and the road ahead, watching for anything that might cause trouble. The first mile passed in tense silence. The second mile brought conversation, hesitant at first but gradually growing more comfortable. Dalton asked about her family, and Katherine found herself telling him about her father, about the mercantile, about how she had been helping run it since her mother died because her father could not manage the books and the customers and the ordering all by himself. "He never remarried," Katherine said, surprised by how much she was sharing with this stranger. But somehow Dalton did not feel like a stranger. There was something about him that invited confidence, a quiet steadiness that made her feel safe. "I think he loved my mother too much to even consider it. He says she was the only woman who could put up with his stubbornness." Dalton smiled at that. Sounds like they had something special. They did. 23 years together, and I never once heard them speak an unkind word to each other. They disagreed plenty. My mother had a spine of steel, but they always worked it out with respect. Katherine paused, then added quietly, "I always hoped I would find something like that." She had not meant to say that last part, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. But Dalton did not tease or make light of it. Instead, he nodded seriously. "That is a good thing to hope for. My parents had that too. Watching them together, the way they were partners in everything, that set the standard for me. I figure if I cannot find something real like that, I would rather be alone." Katherine looked at him with new appreciation. Most of the men she knew in Eureka Springs were either married already or the type who saw women as property or conveniences. Here was a cowboy who spoke about partnership and respect with the kind of sincerity that could not be faked. "You run your ranch alone?" she asked. "Mostly. I have got 2 hands who help during busy seasons, good men who have been with me 3 years now. It is not a big operation, maybe 150 head of cattle, some horses. But it is mine, bought and paid for with money I saved working trail drives after my father passed. He left me some land and I built on it." There was pride in Dalton's voice, the kind that came from accomplishment rather than arrogance. "It is a good life, hard but honest. Wake up every morning knowing exactly what needs doing and go to bed every night having done it." Katherine could picture it easily. Dalton on his ranch, working from dawn to dusk, building something solid and real with his own 2 hands. There was something deeply appealing about that kind of life, about that kind of man. The third mile brought the first real test of the repair. The wagon wheel hit a rut hidden under a thin sheet of ice, and Katherine heard an ominous crack. She immediately pulled buttons to a stop, her heart hammering, and Dalton was off his horse before she could even climb down. He examined the axle carefully, his face tense with concentration. "It is holding," he said finally, "but just barely. The rope shifted a bit. Let me tighten it." He worked quickly, his movements practiced and sure, and within minutes they were moving again. But now Katherine was even more aware of how precarious their situation was, how much she was depending on this man she had met only an hour ago. The sun was lower now, the light taking on that peculiar quality it had in winter, thin and cold and offering no warmth. She knew they had perhaps 2 more hours of daylight at best, and they still had more than 10 miles to cover. "We are not going to make it to town before dark," Dalton said, voicing what Katherine was thinking. "Not at this pace. What do we do?" Katherine tried to keep the fear out of her voice, but some of it leaked through anyway. Dalton was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There is an old line shack about 5 miles ahead, just off the main trail. Belonged to a rancher who went bust last year, but the cabin should still be standing. It is not much, but it will give us shelter for the night and we can make a fire. Then at first light, we finish the trip to town. The thought of spending the night in an isolated cabin with a man she barely knew should have worried Katherine. Her reputation, her safety, all the things a proper young woman was supposed to consider. But as she looked at Dalton, at his honest face and steady eyes, she felt no fear. What she felt was gratitude and something else, something warmer that she was not quite ready to name. "That sounds like the best plan," she said. They pushed on as the temperature continued to drop and the light faded. Katherine's entire body ached from tension and cold, and she could see that Dalton was feeling it too, his shoulders hunched against the wind, his jaw tight. But he never complained, just kept riding beside her, watching over her, making sure she was safe. When they finally saw the line shack, small and weathered but still standing, Katherine could have wept with relief. Dalton helped her down from the wagon, and she stumbled slightly, her legs stiff and uncooperative from hours of sitting in the cold. His arm went around her waist, steadying her, and for just a moment, Katherine let herself lean into his strength, let herself feel the solid warmth of him. "Easy there," he murmured. "You have been sitting too long in this cold. Let us get you inside where it is warmer." The cabin was a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough table, and an old rope bed in the corner. It was dirty and smelled of disuse, but it was shelter, and right then that was worth more than gold. Dalton got Katherine settled on a chair, then immediately went back outside. She could hear him moving around, taking care of the horses, bringing in supplies from the wagon. He worked with the same quiet efficiency he had shown all day, never wasting motion, getting done what needed doing. When he came back in with an armload of firewood that must have been stored under the cabin's overhang, his face was reddened with cold and his breath came in white puffs, but he was smiling. "Found enough dry wood to keep us warm all night. Let me get this fire going." Katherine watched him build the fire, arranging kindling in a careful structure that would catch quickly and burn hot. When the flames took hold, casting warm light across the cabin's rough walls, she felt something in her chest unclench. They were going to be all right. Dalton pulled out supplies from his saddlebags, the practical provisions of a man who spent time on the trail: dried beef, hardtack, a battered tin of coffee. Katherine had food in the wagon too, supplies she had bought in Fort Smith, and together they assembled a simple but welcome meal. As they ate, sitting near the fire's warmth, the conversation flowed more easily than it had all day. Dalton told her about his cattle drive, about pushing 300 head north to Kansas through weather that turned from hot to cold seemingly overnight. He spoke about the men he worked with, about the challenges of keeping cattle moving through difficult terrain, about nights spent under stars so bright they looked close enough to touch. His love for the life he had chosen came through in every word, and Katherine found herself drawn not just to what he was saying, but to the way he said it, with passion tempered by practicality. In turn, Katherine talked about the mercantile, about the satisfaction of ordering stock and seeing it arrive, about knowing the people who came through the doors and understanding what they needed. She talked about the books she kept, the numbers that had to balance, the careful management that kept a business running. She had always been good with figures, a skill her father valued deeply, and she took pride in her work even though part of her sometimes wondered if there was more to life than inventory and ledgers. "You ever want something different?" Dalton asked, his eyes reflecting the firelight, making them seem warmer, more golden. "Not that running a store is not good work, but do you ever dream about doing something else?" Katherine considered the question carefully. No one had ever asked her that before. Sometimes I think about having my own home, a family, building something that is mine the way you have built your ranch. But I love my father and he needs me. So I stay, and most days I am content with that. Most days, Dalton repeated softly. But not all, Katherine admitted. Sometimes I feel like I am waiting for my life to really start, even though I know that is foolish. This is my life right now, and I should make the most of it. Dalton was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I do not think that is foolish. I think wanting more, wanting something deeper, that is just being human. The trick is finding that balance between duty and dreams. Have you found it? Katherine asked. I am working on it. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Katherine felt something shift in the air between them, something electric and unmistakable. Today has made me think about things I have been putting off, telling myself I had time. Being out there on that drive, seeing how fast things can change, how quickly a storm can roll in and turn everything dangerous. It makes a man realize he should not wait for someday when today is right in front of him. Katherine's heart was beating faster, and she could not look away from his eyes. What are you saying? I am saying that meeting you today, spending these hours with you, it has felt different than anything I have felt in a long time. Like maybe the reason I broke off from the main group and took this route home was not just about saving time, but about being exactly where I needed to be when you needed help. Dalton leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his entire focus on her. I know we just met. I know this is crazy, but I feel something here, Katherine, and I think maybe you do too. She should have denied it. She should have been cautious, proper, careful, but Katherine had never been good at lying, especially to herself. I do feel it, she whispered. I felt it the moment you rode up, like I had been waiting for you without knowing it. The smile that broke across Dalton's face was brilliant, transforming him from handsome to absolutely devastating. He reached across the small space between them and took her hand, his fingers warm and rough and gentle all at once. Then maybe we see where this goes. Take our time, do it right, but give this thing between us a chance to grow into something real. Yes, Katherine said, and the word felt like a promise, like a beginning. Yes, I would like that very much. They talked deep into the night, the fire burning steadily, the cold wind howling outside but unable to touch them in their sheltered space. Dalton told Katherine about his dreams for his ranch, about wanting to build it into something substantial that he could pass down to children someday. Katherine shared her fears about her father growing older, about what would happen when he could not run the store anymore, about her own uncertain future. You would never be a burden, Dalton said fiercely when she voiced that particular worry. Any man who saw you that way would be a fool not worth your time. You are capable and smart and brave, Katherine. You did not fall apart when that axle broke, even though you had every reason to panic. You helped me fix it, worked beside me in the freezing cold without complaining once. That is the kind of partner a man dreams about finding. Partner. There was that word again, and coming from Dalton, it sounded like the highest compliment imaginable. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from being truly seen and valued. I should have been more frightened when you rode up, she said. A woman alone, stranded, a strange man appearing out of nowhere. But I looked at you and I just knew somehow that you were safe, that you were someone I could trust. You can trust me, Dalton said seriously. I give you my word on that, Katherine. I will never lie to you, never hurt you, never give you cause to doubt me. That is a promise I make right here, right now. The intensity in his voice, in his eyes, took her breath away. This was a man who meant what he said, who understood the weight of promises and kept them. Katherine squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength, the gentleness. "I believe you," she said simply. Eventually, exhaustion began to creep in, the long day and the cold and the stress catching up with both of them. Dalton insisted Katherine take the rope bed, and despite her protests, he made a pallet of blankets near the fire for himself. "I have slept in worse places more times than I can count," he assured her. "The fire will keep me plenty warm." Katherine lay down on the bed, fully clothed except for her boots, and pulled the blankets up to her chin. From her vantage point, she could see Dalton settling into his makeshift bed, his long form stretched out, his face peaceful in the firelight. She felt safe in a way she had not felt since her mother died, protected and cared for, and the realization made her chest ache with something sweet and fierce. "Dalton," she said softly into the darkness. "Yeah, thank you for everything. For stopping, for helping, for being exactly who you are." She heard him shift, could imagine him smiling. "Get some sleep, Katherine. Tomorrow we finish getting you home, and then we start figuring out what comes next. What comes next." The words held promise and possibility, and Katherine fell asleep with them echoing in her mind like a prayer answered. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Dalton moving around the cabin quietly, trying not to disturb her. Pale gray light filtered through the cabin's single window, and when Katherine sat up, she saw that he had already been outside, already tended to the horses and checked the wagon. His face was freshly shaved, and he looked at her with those warm brown eyes and smiled. "Morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Katherine said honestly. She felt rested despite the rough bed, despite everything. "What about you?" "Just fine. I've got coffee hot and some breakfast ready. We should eat and then get moving. I want to make town by early afternoon. Get that wagon to a proper wheelwright before the repair gives out completely." They ate quickly, the meal simple but satisfying, and Katherine found herself stealing glances at Dalton when he was not looking, memorizing the details of his face, the way he moved, the sound of his voice. This man had entered her life barely 18 hours ago, and already she could not imagine it without him. Outside, the world was transformed. The storm had passed during the night, and now everything sparkled with frost under a sky that was starting to clear. The horses stamped and snorted, their breath steaming, eager to move and warm up. Dalton checked the axle repair one more time, tightened everything, and then helped Katherine up onto the wagon seat. "Here we go," he said, mounting his bay gelding. "Nice and easy, same as yesterday. We will have you home before you know it." The journey that morning had a different quality than the previous day. The desperation and fear were gone, replaced by something quieter but deeper. Katherine was acutely aware of Dalton riding beside her, the way he watched over her with such careful attention, the way he pointed out a hawk soaring overhead or a fox darting across the frozen prairie. He was sharing his world with her, she realized, showing her the beauty he saw in this harsh landscape, and she found herself seeing it through his eyes. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in each other's presence in a way that should have taken months to develop, but felt completely natural. Dalton asked about her childhood, and Katherine found herself laughing as she told him stories about growing up in Eureka Springs, about the time she had tried to reorganize her father's entire stock system when she was 12, and caused absolute chaos for a week. Dalton shared his own stories about learning to ride, about the first time he had roped a calf and how proud his father had been. Around mid-morning, they stopped to rest the horses and check the repair. Everything was holding, but Katherine could see the strain on the ropes, the way the wood was starting to bend. They were running out of time. 4 more miles, Dalton said, reading her worried expression. It will hold, trust me. And she did trust him, completely. They were 2 miles from Eureka Springs when the first buildings came into view, and Katherine felt an unexpected pang. Part of her wanted this journey to last longer, wanted to preserve this bubble where it was just the two of them against the world. But real life was waiting, and with it came questions and decisions and the messy work of turning this fragile new connection into something lasting. Dalton must have sensed her thoughts because he rode closer, so close that his leg nearly brushed her wagon wheel. "This does not end when we reach town," he said quietly. "This is just the beginning, Katherine. I meant what I said last night." "So did I," she replied, meeting his eyes and letting him see the truth in hers. The streets of Eureka Springs were busy despite the cold, people going about their business, bundled against the weather. Katherine saw curious glances as they passed, knew that by nightfall half the town would be talking about Tom Sullivan's daughter arriving with a handsome cowboy riding escort. Let them talk, she thought. She had nothing to be ashamed of. The Mercantile stood on Main Street, a solid 2-story building with Sullivan Mercantile painted in bold letters across the front. Katherine felt a rush of love for the familiar place, for her father who would be inside worrying about her, wondering why she had not arrived yesterday as planned. Dalton helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist, and she found herself reluctant to let go. The door burst open and Tom Sullivan came rushing out, his face a mixture of relief and worry and gathering anger. He was a big man in his 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair and a weathered face that showed every year of hard work. "Katherine Elizabeth Sullivan, where have you been?" "I have been worried sick. The storm came through and you did not arrive, and I was about to organize a search party." "I am sorry, Papa," Katherine said, moving to embrace him. "The wagon broke down about 15 miles out. If Dalton had not come along when he did, I do not know what would have happened." Tom's attention shifted to Dalton, his eyes sharp and assessing in the way of fathers everywhere. "Dalton Xavier, I know you. You have got that ranch out east of town." "Yes, sir," Dalton said, offering his hand. Tom shook it, his grip firm, his expression still wary. "I was heading back from a cattle drive, found your daughter stranded with a broken axle. I made a temporary repair and rode with her to make sure she got home safe." "And where did you spend last night?" Tom asked bluntly, and Katherine felt her cheeks heat. "Papa." But Dalton did not flinch from the question. "In an old line shack about 10 miles out, sir. The repair would not have held in the dark and the temperature was dropping fast. It was the safe choice, the only choice. Your daughter's reputation and safety were my priority. I slept by the fire, she took the bed, and nothing improper occurred. You have my word on that." Tom studied Dalton for a long moment, and Katherine held her breath. Then her father's expression softened slightly. "I believe you. You have always struck me as a decent man, Xavier, and I am grateful you were there to help my daughter. Katherine means everything to me." "I understand that, sir. She means a great deal to me too, though I know that probably sounds strange given we just met." Dalton glanced at Katherine, and the look in his eyes made her heart skip. "But I would like your permission to call on her properly, with all due respect and propriety. I am interested in courting your daughter, Mr. Sullivan, if she is willing and you will allow it." The words hung in the cold air, formal and old-fashioned and absolutely perfect. Katherine watched her father's face, saw the surprise there, the consideration, and then something that looked almost like approval. "That is up to Katherine," Tom said finally. "She is a grown woman and she makes her own choices. But I will say this. You treat her right, Xavier, or you answer to me. Clear, crystal clear, sir," Dalton said, and he was smiling. "I would not have it any other way." Tom looked between them, shook his head with something that might have been amusement, and then gestured toward the store. Well, come on inside before we all freeze. Katherine, you need to warm up and rest. Xavier, I will buy you lunch at the hotel to thank you proper for helping my daughter. I appreciate that, but first let me get Katherine's wagon to the wheelwright. That temporary fix is not going to last much longer. They got the wagon safely to the wheelwright's shop, where a grizzled old craftsman named Henrik took one look at Dalton's repair and whistled low. Whoever did this splint work knew what they were doing. This should have broken completely, but you got it all the way to town. Impressive. Can you fix it proper? Katherine asked. Oh sure, but it will take a few days. Need to get a new axle made, fit it right. Come back Friday, should be ready then. With the wagon taken care of, Dalton walked Katherine and Tom back to the mercantile. At the door, he paused, his hat in his hands, looking at Katherine with an expression that made her pulse race. May I call on you tomorrow evening? Take you to dinner at the hotel? I would love that, Katherine said softly. After Dalton left to tend to his own business, Tom ushered Katherine inside and immediately set about fussing over her, making her sit by the stove with hot tea and a blanket around her shoulders. You gave me such a fright, he said, his voice rough with emotion. When you did not come in yesterday and that storm hit, I kept thinking about your mother, about how I lost her, and I could not bear the thought of losing you too. Katherine hugged him tightly. I am fine, Papa, I promise. And Dalton was a perfect gentleman. Tom pulled back, studying her face with eyes that saw too much. You like him. I can see it all over your face. I do, Katherine admitted. I know it is fast, I know it seems crazy, but Papa, there is something there, something real. Her father sighed, but he was smiling. Your mother and I knew each other 2 weeks before I asked her to marry me. Her father thought I was insane, but she said yes anyway, and we had 23 good years together. So who am I to judge fast? He touched Katherine's cheek gently. Just be careful with your heart, sweetheart. Make sure he is worthy of it. I think he is, Katherine said. I really think he is. Over the next 3 months, Dalton proved her right in every possible way. He courted Katherine with old-fashioned patience and respect, calling on her regularly, taking her to dinners and church socials, always treating her like she was precious and valuable. He made friends with Tom, spending evenings at the mercantile helping with heavy lifting and repairs, proving himself reliable and trustworthy. And slowly, carefully, he and Katherine built something solid together. He took her out to his ranch on a bright December day, and Katherine fell in love with the place almost as much as she was falling in love with him. The ranch house was simple but well built, with a wide porch and views that stretched for miles. Dalton showed her everything with obvious pride. The barn he had built himself, the corrals where he broke horses, the cattle grazing on winter range. This was his dream made real, and he wanted to share it with her. I know it is not fancy, he said as they stood on the porch watching the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and pink. But it is a good life, Katherine. Hard work, but satisfying, and it could support a family when the time comes. Katherine turned to him, saw the question in his eyes even though he had not asked it yet. Are you asking me something, Dalton Xavier? He smiled, that devastating smile that made her heart flutter every single time. Not yet, but soon. I am going to do this right, Katherine. I am going to make sure your father approves, make sure you are absolutely certain, and then I am going to ask you properly to be my wife. And when you do, Katherine said softly, stepping closer to him, I am going to say yes. Dalton kissed her then, the first real kiss they had shared, and it was everything Katherine had dreamed it would be. Gentle and passionate, respectful and claiming, a promise of everything they would build together. He proposed in February, on a day when the winter had loosened its grip enough to hint at coming spring. He did it right, exactly as he had promised. kneeling in Tom Sullivan's parlor with Katherine's father watching, and a ring that had belonged to his mother held carefully in his hand. "Katherine Sullivan, you are the most amazing woman I have ever known. You are brave and smart and kind, and spending time with you has become the best part of every single day. I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Will you marry me?" Katherine was crying and laughing at the same time, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, Dalton, of course yes." Tom gave his blessing with tears in his own eyes, and that night they celebrated with a dinner that brought together the people who mattered most to them. Katherine looked around the table at her father, at Dalton, at the ranch hands who had become friends, and felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. They were married in April of 1879, in the small church in Eureka Springs with the whole town in attendance. Katherine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and carried wildflowers that Dalton had picked himself from the prairie. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his face transformed with such love and awe that Katherine knew she had made exactly the right choice. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife. Dalton kissed his bride with tender passion, and Katherine began her new life as Mrs. Xavier, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. They moved to the ranch, and Katherine threw herself into making it a true home. She learned ranching alongside her husband, discovering that she loved the rhythm of ranch life, the closeness to nature, the satisfaction of hard physical work. She kept the books for the ranch the same way she had for the mercantile, her skill with numbers helping Dalton make smart decisions about buying and selling cattle. They were true partners in every sense, working side by side, building their life together one day at a time. Tom Sullivan came to visit regularly, and Katherine made the trip into town at least once a week to help at the store. Her father hired a young man to help with the daily operations, but Katherine still managed the books and ordering, finding balance between her old life and her new one. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, learning to live together, learning each other's habits and quirks. But Katherine and Dalton worked through every challenge with communication and compromise, never letting problems fester, always remembering why they had chosen each other. And the love between them deepened with every passing month, growing from that initial spark into something unshakable. In the spring of 1880, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Dalton one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same place where he had first hinted at marriage. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply, and watched his face light up with wonder. "A baby," he breathed, pulling her into his arms carefully, like she was made of glass. "Katherine, you have made me the happiest man alive." Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Daniel Thomas Xavier, after both grandfathers, and from the moment Katherine held him, she understood a depth of love she had never imagined possible. Dalton was a natural father, patient and gentle with their son, getting up for midnight feedings and diaper changes without complaint, singing lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice that made both Katherine and the baby settle peacefully. Tom Sullivan was absolutely besotted with his grandson, visiting the ranch even more frequently, bringing toys and clothes and spoiling the boy shamelessly. Katherine would watch her father holding Daniel and see the grief for her mother ease slightly, see him finding new purpose in this next generation. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Margaret Rose after Dalton's mother. She was tiny and fierce from birth, with a temper that made them laugh even as they struggled through sleepless nights. Daniel was protective of his baby sister, always wanting to help, and watching her children together made Katherine's heart overflow. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Dalton's reputation for raising good cattle and better horses spread, and they were able to expand, buying adjacent land, increasing their herd. Katherine's business sense kept them profitable even in lean years, and together they built something substantial, something they could pass to their children. There were hard times, too. A drought in 1883 that killed 30 head of cattle and tested their resources to the limit. A fire in 1885 that destroyed the barn and almost took the house, leaving them shaken but determined to rebuild. Tom Sullivan's death in 1887, peaceful in his sleep at 64, which devastated Katherine but also brought a bittersweet gratitude that he had known his grandchildren and seen her happy through all of it. Dalton was her rock and her partner. He held her when she cried for her father, worked beside her to rebuild after the fire, made her laugh when the stress of drought seemed overwhelming. And Katherine did the same for him, supporting him through the failures that came with ranching, celebrating the successes, always reminding him that they were in this together, no matter what. In 1888, Katherine gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Sarah. The ranch was chaotic with 4 children, loud and messy and absolutely wonderful. Daniel was 8 and took his role as oldest seriously, helping with the younger ones. Margaret was 6 and determined to do everything her brothers could do, often succeeding. And the twins were curious and adventurous from birth, constantly getting into mischief that kept Katherine and Dalton on their toes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton surprised Katherine with a trip back to the spot where he had found her stranded all those years ago. They rode out together on a mild April day, the prairie coming alive with spring, and stood looking at the empty landscape that had brought them together. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had not come along that day?" Dalton asked, his arm around Katherine's waist. "I try not to," Katherine admitted. "It frightens me, thinking about how close I came to disaster. But then I remember that you did come along exactly when I needed you, and everything else followed from that moment." "Best day of my life," Dalton said firmly, "the day I found you." "Well, one of the best days. Marrying you was pretty good too, and the births of each of our children. All right, maybe one of the top 10 best days." Katherine laughed and swatted his chest playfully. "Only top 10. He turned her to face him, his expression serious now despite the teasing moment before. "Dalton Xavier, loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. Building this ranch with you, raising our children with you, waking up next to you every single morning, that is what makes life worth living. You are my partner, my best friend, my love, and I would not change a single thing about our story." "Neither would I," Katherine whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Not one single thing." They rode home as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that took Katherine's breath away. Ahead of them she could see the ranch house, lights glowing warm in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. She could hear children's laughter carried on the wind, could picture Dalton's ranch hands finishing evening chores, could imagine supper waiting on the stove. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had dreamed of that night in the line shack when Dalton had first spoken of partnership and possibility. And it was even better than she had imagined because it was real, built on love and hard work and unwavering commitment. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Daniel grew into a serious young man who loved ranching as much as his father, already talking about expanding operations and new breeding techniques. Margaret was smart as a whip and wanted to go to teachers' college, a dream both her parents supported fully. The twins were 10 now, still inseparable, still curious about everything. Katherine was 43 years old, Dalton 46, and they had been married 20 years. 20 years of laughter and tears, triumph and struggle, passion and partnership. They sat on their porch on a warm summer evening in 1899, watching their children play in the yard, and Katherine took Dalton's hand. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" she asked. "About not waiting for someday when today was right in front of you." "I remember," Dalton said, squeezing her hand. "Best decision I ever made, not waiting." "I think about that sometimes," Katherine mused. "How one moment can change everything. If that axle had not broken. If you had taken a different route home. If I had been too afraid to trust you. Our entire life together hinged on those moments." "Maybe it was not chance," Dalton suggested. "Maybe it was meant to be. I like to think some force in the universe knew we belonged together and made sure our paths crossed when they needed to." Katherine smiled. "That is romantic thinking from a practical rancher." "You make me romantic," Dalton said with a grin. 20 years later, and you still make my heart race, Katherine Xavier." "Good," Katherine said, "because you still make mine race too." Their oldest son married in 1901. A good woman named Elizabeth who fit into the family perfectly and brought 2 more grandchildren into Katherine and Dalton's lives. Margaret went to teachers' college and returned to teach in Eureka Springs, making both her parents immensely proud. The twins eventually went into business together, opening a feed store in town that quickly became successful. Katherine and Dalton grew older together gracefully, their hair graying, lines deepening on their faces, but the love between them never diminishing. If anything, it grew stronger with time, tempered by shared experience, deepened by decades of choosing each other every single day. They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1909, surrounded by children and grandchildren, the ranch house full to bursting with family and love and laughter. Daniel gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion. "To my parents who showed all of us what real love looks like, what partnership means, what it takes to build something lasting. Everything I am, everything we all are, comes from the foundation you two built together." Katherine cried, but they were happy tears. She looked around at all these beautiful people who existed because she had taken a wagon trip in winter, and Dalton had been riding home at exactly the right moment. All of this love, all of this family, all of this life had grown from that single day when a cowboy stopped to help a woman in trouble. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton murmured in her ear as the party went on around them. "That broken axle," Katherine said. "Best thing that ever happened to me." Dalton laughed, that wonderful laugh she had fallen in love with 3 decades ago. "Best thing that ever happened to both of us." They retired from active ranching in 1912, turning daily operations over to Daniel while they took an advisory role. It was strange at first, not working from dawn to dusk, but Katherine and Dalton found new rhythms. They traveled some, taking trips they had never had time for before. They spent time with grandchildren, spoiling them the way Tom Sullivan had spoiled Daniel all those years ago. They read together on the porch, took long walks across the prairie, made love with the unhurried passion of people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own. In 1918, the Spanish flu swept through Arkansas, taking young and old alike. Katherine and Dalton survived it, though Katherine was very ill for several weeks. Dalton never left her side, nursing her with the same gentle care he had always shown, refusing to consider a world without her in it. When she finally recovered, weak but alive, the first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was his face, lined with exhaustion and relief and love. "I am not going anywhere," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Not without you." "Good," Dalton said, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Because I am not ready to say goodbye yet. We have got more life to live, you and me." And they did. Years more precious and sweet. They saw their children settled and successful, their grandchildren growing into fine people, and eventually great-grandchildren arriving to carry the Xavier name into the next generation. On a spring day in 1925, Katherine and Dalton celebrated their 46th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them on the porch they had shared for so many years. Katherine was 69 years old now, Dalton 72, and they moved more slowly, ached more often, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. 46 years, Katherine marveled. It went by so fast. And too slow at the same time, Dalton said. "I want more years with you, Katherine. I want decades more." "So do I," Katherine said softly. "But whatever time we have left, we will make it count." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and beautiful, a living testament to everything they had built together. In the distance, Katherine could hear her great-grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the warm spring breeze. No regrets. Dalton asked, the same question he had asked her 100 times over the years. "Not a single one," Katherine answered, the same way she always did. "You." "Only that I did not find you sooner," Dalton said. "But then again, maybe we found each other at exactly the right time. Maybe we needed to be exactly who we were, that day in winter when your wagon broke and I rode by. Maybe that was our perfect moment." Katherine thought about that, about timing and fate and choice, about a young woman stranded in the cold and a cowboy who stopped to help, about how one act of kindness had grown into a lifetime of love, about how they had built this extraordinary life together from that single moment of connection. "It was perfect," she agreed. "All of it has been perfect because we were together." Dalton raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Together," he echoed, "always together." And that was how their children found them later that evening when they came to bring supper. Katherine and Dalton asleep on the porch, hands still linked, faces peaceful. They had both simply drifted off together, their hearts giving out at nearly the same moment, as if even in death they could not bear to be parted. The family mourned, but they also celebrated. Celebrated a love that had lasted 46 years and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Celebrated two people who had shown them all what it meant to truly partner with someone, to build a life based on respect and passion and unwavering commitment. They buried Katherine and Dalton side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as blue and endless as the one that had watched over them that first day they met. And if you visited that spot on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, you could almost hear laughter, could almost see a young woman and a cowboy riding together across the prairie, choosing each other over and over again for all eternity. The Xavier Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one adding to the legacy Katherine and Dalton had begun. And family stories always came back to that winter day in 1878, when a wagon broke and a cowboy stopped, and two hearts found their perfect match against all odds. It became the foundation story of the entire family, the reminder that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances if you were brave enough to trust it, wise enough to nurture it, and determined enough to fight for it every single day. And so the love story that began with a broken axle on a frozen prairie lived on, not just in memory, but in the lives of every person who carried Xavier blood, every couple who looked at Katherine and Dalton's example and understood what real partnership meant. Their love had been the kind that changed lives, that built dynasties, that proved beyond any doubt that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simple choice to help a stranger in need.